So I'm often asked, you see, because I'm a scientist, and as John also a lay preacher, lay reader, we call it in the Anglican Church. So I'm often asked, how do you reconcile this question of yours? How do you reconcile science and religion? And of course, for a good number of years, I didn't know where these questions were coming from, because I thought if there was really a problem here, then I would be living two lives. I would be a schizophrenic person divided down my middle, and I would feel this huge cognitive dissonance, is I think the word. But I don't. I just know why. So where have people got this idea from? And I've realised in these readings, reading the history of science, reading what scientists say. So just, here are some clues. So tell me some great scientists through the ages. Copernicus, Galileo, Kepler, Boyle, Halley, Maxwell, Faraday, Heisenberg, Born, the great quantum mechanics people, all the way to people like Francis Collins, who's around the Human Genome Project. Now, these aren't run-of-the-mill scientists. These are the best of the best of the best. Okay, every one of the people I just mentioned explicitly said how they're doing their science in their service of God. It's their Christian faith in those cases that drove them, part of their worship, part of their wonder, part of their, what St. Paul calls working out their salvation, fear and trembling, part of what they do because of their Christian belief is their science. Well, there's an interesting clue, isn't it? So where does this come from? And the conflict thesis is a sort of, well, the point is, if you say something loud enough and often enough, people believe it. If you say religion and science are in conflict enough, loud enough and often enough, people will assume it's true without actually looking at the evidence. But it's not true. Now, it is true that you can manufacture a conflict. So if, for example, you read the Bible as a scientific text, which it wasn't written to be, or and never meant to be, mm-hmm. and for example, of all the 30 or 40 creation stories in the Bible, you just pick one of them and you decide that's the scientific one, like the Genesis 6 days one, you say, I think the world was created in 6 days, then you're manufacturing a conflict. And it's an unnecessary one because that's not Orthodox Christian teaching throughout the millennia at all. So you can manufacture it, but it is manufactured. And at the end of the 19th century, and if there are a couple of books, one by a man called Mr. Draper and one by a man called Mr. White, one of them became the founder of Cornell University, with titles like The History of the Conflict, Eternal Conflict Between Science and Religion. And these are polemics, they're not histories. But although people haven't heard of these books, they have taken on board the message of them. So we need to learn from history, we need to learn from theology, and we need to learn from practice that you don't have to choose between science and theology or religious belief. In fact, far from it. So not only has in the past, particularly, both in Islam and in Judaism and in Christianity, have all three at different points in history been uncontrovertibly healthy, nurturing places mm-hmm. for advances in science, for open-ended questioning. Take the Ordered Universe project. There's a place in the 12th and 13th century where pagan science from Aristotle was being read through Muslim commentary and transmission by Christian philosophers, all together realizing that we need to get going on understanding the natural world mm-hmm. and that we can bring all this together. Now, this is the public press for this medieval world. It's a press that says this is dogmatic and closed. But it wasn't. It was a civilization and a sort of ecclesiology that gave rise to that, which lit the blue touch taper, which became the scientific revolution 3 centuries later. So we need to talk a bit more about this and put it into practice.
And so, yes, I agree with you. We actually shouldn't cause that white line, that framed opposition that you've been speaking about between science and religion. But I think what you're saying is that it involves a much deeper consideration of God mm-hmm. in order to consider where these things meet. Mm-hmm. And perhaps this is a question that you're asked a lot about science or about by scientists. Do I need God to do my research?
Yes.
Because many would consider that they don't.
Well, that's true. And I think we had a question of this kind yesterday, didn't I? And I say, no, but the wonderful thing is that God, as well as being utterly wonderful, is also very humble. And no, you don't need God to do science. This is going back to our medieval world. So Aristotle and Plato were being recognised as having conceived tremendous, wonderful ideas by Christians who recognised that God gave them these things to do, and that just because they weren't believers didn't mean that their ideas should be dismissed. So it's not new to say, no, of course you don't need God. However, it's I think vital both for children and society to make it clear that you don't have to choose between either religious or generally or Christian belief in specifically or science, that they're utterly compatible. But the other thing to say is that an unfortunate consequence of too many people believing the conflict thing is that the church has perceived science as a sort of threat and spent a long time either defending itself against this perceived bugbear or running as hard as it can in the direction, which is a huge pity, because in our current moment, as indeed in all moments, so many of these important questions you mentioned, like what we do about climate change, like what we do about population growth, like what we do about energy, all these things, or fracking, whatever it is, connect communities, local and national political communities, to important scientific questions. And we can't afford for the church not to be supporting that debate. Mm-hmm. So part of what I'm saying is, as a result of all this theology, if you like, but as a result of anything, and there can be secular arguments for this, it's really important the church gets on its feet and helps, if I sort of lubricate or support in a light, truthful, non-fearful way these important discussions, and helps the debates be healthy debates rather than these sort of shockingly brittle debates that we have at the moment. And I think there's a huge role for the church there. So that's another angle. We've got another project where I'm working with bishops and senior Christian leaders, getting them in the labs, getting them on to the bench with young scientists, and they're getting on fine. And so where we've tried this, I've found it works very, very, very well indeed. So I think that getting the church behind science, giving the science a great big bear hug, really, and recognising it as God's gift, not a threat, it will be important to a secular society, whether or not that secular society recognises the theological belief behind it.